Rain poured down on Fort Westfield, streaking the steel roofs and collecting in puddles that reflected the amber glow of the watchtower lamps. The base was always restless. At night men marched, trucks rumbled, and radios crackled with clipped orders. But beneath that routine order, whispers spread about one woman, Lieutenant Aria Kane. Aria wasn't new to the military, though she had only recently been stationed at Westfield. A veteran of 3 deployments and a decorated sniper, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that unsettled those who underestimated her. Unlike others who boasted about their kills and scars, she stayed silent, her actions speaking louder than any war story. And that silence was exactly why Colonel Davis hated her. Davis was old school, tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that thundered across parade grounds. He had ruled the base with intimidation, demanding blind obedience and unquestioning loyalty. For years, no one dared challenge him. But when Aria arrived, things began to shift. She noticed things like corruption in supply chains, soldiers bullied during drills, junior officers humiliated for asking questions. And she didn't keep quiet. She filed reports, brought evidence, and confronted Davis directly during meetings. "You can't run a base like a dictatorship," she had told him once, her voice level, her eyes locked on his. That single sentence spread across the base like wildfire. Soldiers whispered about it in the mess hall. For the first time, they realized someone had dared to stand up to Davis. The colonel stood in humiliation. Every time he saw her steady gaze, her unshaken composure, a rage boiled inside him. He didn't just want her silenced, he wanted her broken. The breaking point came during a Friday inspection. Davis strode down the barracks hall, barking criticisms about unpolished boots and untucked sheets. Aria stood at the far end, arms folded behind her back, her uniform pristine. "You think you are better than everyone else, Kane?" Davis spat when he reached her. "No, sir," she answered flatly. "Then wipe that smug look off your face." She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. That calmness was like a knife to Davis's ego. His face twisted, and before anyone could react, he grabbed her by the collar, yanked her into the latrine, and shoved her head into a toilet bowl. The soldiers nearby froze. The sound of water splashing, her muffled gasp, it sent a chill through the room. This is what happens when someone forgets their place. Davis roared, holding her down. "You're not special, Kane. You're nothing." Gasps and murmurs echoed, but no one moved. The chain of command was iron. To intervene against a colonel was to risk your career, maybe even prison. After what felt like an eternity, Davis yanked her up. Water dripped from her hair, streaming down her face, but her eyes, those unyielding, steel gray eyes, burned with something he hadn't expected. Not fear, not shame, something far more dangerous. She didn't speak. She just straightened her uniform, brushed the water from her cheek, and stared at him. Then, with calm precision, she said, "Understood, sir," and walked out. The silence she left behind was deafening. That night, the base buzzed with rumors. Some soldiers were outraged, others terrified. Many whispered that Aria would be discharged or quietly transferred, but others, especially the younger recruits, looked at her with newfound respect. Aria, however, didn't waste time on whispers. She went straight to her quarters, cleaned herself up, and began preparing. She didn't file a complaint. She didn't scream for justice. She knew Davis had buried worse offenses before. He had allies in high places, men who looked the other way as long as the reports stayed clean. A formal complaint would vanish before reaching anyone who cared. So she decided on something Davis would never forget. 2 days later, the base prepared for its quarterly war game as a mock combat exercises meant to test readiness. Soldiers were divided into 2 groups: the red team, led by Davis, and the blue team, which Aria was assigned to. Normally, these games were predictable. Davis always won, through sheer force of numbers and brute tactics. But this time was different. Aria took command of her unit, a group of underdogs, raw recruits, mechanics, and a few overlooked corporals. While Davis boasted about overwhelming strength, she studied maps, identified choke points, and drilled her team with strategies that mirrored real combat. "Don't fight them head-on," she instructed. "Make them chase you, cut their supply lines, hit hard, vanish, then hit again. We don't outmuscle them, we outthink them." Her words lit a fire in her unit. For the first time, they felt like they had a leader who saw them not as pawns, but as soldiers with potential. The war game began at dawn. Fog hung low over the training fields, masking movement. Davis marched his battalion forward like a hammer ready to crush, but every time his men advanced, they found nothing, just empty ground and the echo of their own boots. Then, out of nowhere, Aria's team struck. Ambush after ambush. Quick, precise, and devastating. Supply trucks were destroyed, comms units were captured, and Davis's men were forced to waste time chasing ghosts. Davis grew furious. Find Kane and crush her. He barked into his radio, but Aria stayed one step ahead. She anticipated every move, setting traps that whittled his forces down until his once mighty battalion was scattered and disorganized. By the final phase of the exercise, Davis had only a fraction of his force left. When he stormed into what he thought was Aria's hideout, he found himself surrounded. His men lowered their weapons in defeat as the umpires declared the blue team the winner. The base exploded in cheers. Soldiers who had endured years under Davis's iron hand couldn't believe what they'd seen. The untouchable colonel humiliated on the battlefield. And at the center of it all stood Aria, calm, collected, her wet hair from 2 nights ago now tied neatly back, her eyes steady. But she wasn't done. That evening, Davis summoned her to his office. His face was red with rage, his hands trembling as he slammed them on his desk. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled. "You embarrassed me in front of my men. You think they'll follow you now? You'll regret this." Aria didn't flinch. She stepped forward, placed a sealed folder on his desk, and said quietly, "It's over, sir." Inside the folder were photos, documents, and testimonies she had collected over weeks, evidence of Davis's corruption, abuse, and misconduct, supply theft, falsified reports, even incidents of assault. Every page was damning. "I could have gone to command directly," she said, her voice calm, "but I wanted you to see it first, because tomorrow morning, when the investigators arrive, you'll know exactly who sent them." Davis's face drained of color. For the first time, the man who had terrorized hundreds of soldiers looked powerless. "You a broken bar," he whispered. "Yes," Aria said. "Me, the one you thought you could break with a toilet bowl." She turned and walked out, leaving him staring at the evidence that would end his career. By the end of the week, the base was transformed. Davis was escorted off in disgrace, his rank stripped, his legacy destroyed. The soldiers who had once feared him now spoke his name only in bitter curses. As for Aria, she didn't seek glory. She continued her duties, training recruits, refining strategy, and pushing her unit to new heights. But across the base, her name carried a different weight now. She wasn't just Lieutenant Aria, she was the woman who had stood up to a tyrant and won. And every soldier who had watched that day, who had seen her soaked and humiliated only to rise stronger, carried a new kind of courage in their hearts. They learned that respect isn't commanded through fear, but earned through strength, intelligence, and integrity. And though Aria never spoke of it again, the story spread far beyond Westfield. In every mess hall, in every whispered conversation across distant outposts, they told the tale. The colonel dunked her head in a Toyota, and what she did next shocked the base.